Word to the Cloud. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. And this is our structural literacy instruction. This is our third time together this series. I did this series in August. I'll be doing it again in January. If there are any that you missed, you can always join us again. So this is our September 26th structural literacy instruction for students with dyslexia and others who struggle to read and write. I know it's very long. It didn't used to be so long. I think I didn't have the word dyslexia in there, but I wanted to make sure that everyone who goes to PD Enroller can find my classes easily. So one of the things that we always start with is a land acknowledgement, and I will invite, if there's anyone in the Zoom room who would like to share your own land acknowledgement or to read ours for us, as well as if you'd like to put in your own recognition into the chat box, mention where you are, or just a statement or anything you'd like to share. So I'm going to put a link into the chat box. If you don't know where you are, it has a map for everyone to access and find out where the native lands are that you are in. And do I have a volunteer to either read this or share something of your own?
I'll read it if that's okay.
Of course, thank you. Hi, Trish.
Hi, good to see everyone. Since time immemorial, EDS 113 is humbly responsible for serving the territories of many Indigenous peoples, including those whose affirmation lies outside of U.S. federal recognition. Both prior and during colonial occupation, the migratory histories of Native diasporic peoples have meant life on and stewardship of these lands and air and waters as sites for human activity since time immemorial. Still, this region presents abundant opportunities to disrupt systemic harm and deliver meaningful, equitable change through service, restorative justice, and collaboration. May we all proceed swiftly and joyfully.
Thank you, Trish. I appreciate that. And thank you from Katrina. Oh, thank you. You're on the Puyallup, Cayuse, and Walla Walla. That's where I am at the moment. I'm over in Walla Walla. So one thing too that I borrowed from one of my colleagues at ESD 101 up in the Spokane area is this recognition that acknowledgement is but a first step. It does not stand in for relationship and action, but it can begin to point toward deeper possibilities for decolonizing relationships with people and place. Thank you, Carrie. Okay, so I am juggling a little bit. As I mentioned, I'm in a hotel. I'm not in my normal screen. So if you see some lack of, if things are a little clunky, I do ask for your grace today. So I do have this recognition also from our colleagues at OSPI, recognizing the pain and trauma from over 400 years of racism and pledging to stand with our communities of color, especially those who identify as and or categorize as African American. We also acknowledge the intersectionality of those who identify both as persons of color and as individuals with disabilities. It's a commitment to centering our work to dismantling systemic racism and disrupting ableist structures. For those of you who are new, these are the guideposts that I try to use, and this is an evolving process for me. One of the things I think is really crucial as we work with kids with disabilities, but especially our kids with dyslexia, and frankly, even ourselves, is that the more we can provide icons to cue us to remember things, and it becomes this reminder, and it becomes a link that is a nonverbal, non-wordy link to say, oh yes, this is something that to remind us about. In this case, if you see the icon with the handouts, then it'll be something that you can print up and take home. The activity will be an opportunity to engage. Time to reflect will be usually a breakout time for you to verbalize, to internalize. But if you want to just turn off your camera and have your own reflection time or writing time to think about, I think that's an important part of our process and our learning is reflecting upon what we're learning. The practical strategies, obviously you can see one here is using these icons that are strategies that you can use in your classroom right away. And resources are usually electronic links that I'll put into the chat box. Okay. Zoom tips, these are not obviously coming up electronic, animated, but these are requests. So in other words, number one, I do ask that you rename yourself with your name and your district. You'll see many of, if you scroll into the pictures, many people have their district after their name. That's so that we can build community and understand and learn from each other. So for example, Trish, you just read for us, what district are you with?
Archdiocese of Seattle, and I just put it in.
I do see that. Thank you. I appreciate it. If you're struggling, if you don't know how, please let me know. Just put it into chat. I would be happy to put it on for you. The video on is helpful for me right now. Actually, Trish is the only one I can see. So thank you, Trish, for being the person that I can see, whom I can see. It's helpful for me to have nonverbal feedback. And I know that you're in the room, which when you go into breakout rooms, it's helpful for you to be able to see each other. The asterisk is there because I know that sometimes people have things going on. I've heard someone say that they're not feeling very well. I've heard sometimes where there are distractions, your life, your kids, if you're home, or your connectivity issues. So the asterisk, it means it's a request. It's helpful. Angela, you're driving. You don't have to have your video on. Be careful. It's a request, not a... It is helpful to have it, but I understand if you don't. That's why it has an asterisk. The mute when you're not talking is helpful, but if there's not noise behind you, I don't mind if you stay unmuted all the time. It all depends on whether or not there are things that are distracting for us. The communication icons, you can see that the raised hand is where you find that. You go to, I think your, if you go under reactions, that's where you can find the raise hand option. Because unless you're Trish or Darren, I can't see you doing this. You're going to have to use your electronic hand. And then the annotations up at the top where it says your screen, viewing my screen, you click view options, and you'll see one of the options that says annotate. It has a little pencil. When you click that, it brings up this, in fact, I'm going to bring annotate to give you a spotlight here. What is that? Let me just get my pen. Here we go. It will bring up this little bar here, and then you can draw, stamp, arrow, and then if you want to change the color of whatever you're drawing with or writing with, you can click this little format button. No worries, Tammy. Little by little, we understand that. That's a great segue to, I'm going to jump around a little bit to our requests of as we work together and talk to each other and support each other. I shift these a little bit each time, but I think one of the things that are really important for me are, of course, the refraining for judgment, that we share openly, we hear openly, and most of all, we give ourselves and each other grace. And if you want to be writing and stamping while I'm talking, please do. For me, it's an engagement tool. Okay. I also share our teaching and learning beliefs. I think this is a great way to ground into what's important to me. And you'll see the little engagement icon because there's an invitation here to have you either stamp or put into the chat box what stands out to you of these. Which one do you connect with tonight? Which one really drives kind of what you do? And I think for me, of course, what drives me is this big word all. Not only do I believe that all students can learn, I believe that all teachers can teach all students. And so really that's connects to the fact why we continue to do professional development, why we continue to learn. And because we have a growth mindset and that knows there's always more I can learn. There's more that I can do to do better. And that's, for me, it's a lifelong learning thing. I think we are so lucky that we are in this profession that not only encourages, but almost requires for us to continue learning, because we can be learning about our kids forever. And so there's always more to learn. So thank you for adding on. The building relationships is why I asked to be able to see you safely. And to get to know you. I want to know where you're from. I want to know what you do. And so it's helpful to give me some of that context when you share and to each other as well. that active engagement. That's why I say draw on the screen, use your resources, engage. I notice a lot of people are mentioning this professional development and that quality teaching. Does somebody want to unmute and kind of connect in why I agree and research agrees, but what's it saying to you? Thank you, Casey. I'll get the attendance link while people are doing that. Attendance link and our resources. No? All right, there's the attendance, and the second link is our resources for us. All right, looks like nobody wants to unmute and chat. That's okay, you can have another chance later. I'll give you about 3 more seconds to input either a chat or a stamp. And then we're going to move on. Thank you for the contributions, everyone. Going to clear all that off.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Cherry. Go ahead.
Yay!
Cherry, did you want to talk about which one spoke to you?
Pardon?
Did you want to talk about which one of these speaks to you tonight? Or were you just checking your sound?
Took me forever to get on, so hold on just a second.
No worries. What district are you with, Cherry? We'll come back. You think about it.
I kind of like all of them, so it's a little hard for me to pick out just one specific one.
I appreciate that. In fact, you know what? I'm realizing this is my older version. I've remade a new one where I took this out because while that's important for us as teachers, these relationships are important as well. Our relationships with the other adults in the building, with everyone who's in the building, who's outside of the building, with the families, with the communities. All relationships are really the foundation for change. So I'll leave that one as thanks, Stephanie, you're adding that as well. All right, I'm going to leave that in for that. And we're going to go to our goals, and feel free at any point in time if there's something you think of, bring it up. Let's have this a conversation. Okay, so these are the goals for the whole series. We're not getting into all this tonight. And if it gets a little dark, just let me know and I'll change the lighting. So I just wanted to draw our attention to the fact and re-ground us. And this is the strategy here is that when kids know their goal, they know what we're working toward, it gives us some clarity on our path and helps us focus our learning. So in this case, we're looking at understanding structured explicit literacy instruction and how that applies to my students' reading growth and what I can do to help them grow in their knowledge of literacy. And when I'm talking about my own knowledge of literacy, I'm talking about understanding phonology, orthography, etymology, morphology, syntax, semantics, a lot of big technical words that you may not be comfortable with yet, but I hope that by the end of our 14 hours together, you will definitely be more comfortable with them. Little by little, and this is really where I said the grace that I once had a class of master students worried about the tests that I'd be giving. And I said, frankly, I don't expect you to have the same level of understanding I do. I've been doing this for a long time. When I first started out with this, these terms it took me a while for them to sink into. The more we use them, the more comfortable we are with them. Okay. Carrie, I'll get you the resource link again for you, just by itself. For those of you who don't have that, there you go. Okay, and that's also where I put the recordings, is on that resource link. All right, so here's our outline, and my invitation to engage here is that I want us to just pause for a moment and think and talk about the phonology and phonemic awareness that we talked about last time. And I do know we have some new people, so just kind of maybe if there's somebody who would want to give a high-level highlight or overview. And as we do, I do want to add one thing that I have been watching conversations in a listserv since then about whether or not to use mouth cards in your sound walls. because we as adults need to know what our mouths are doing. And it's helpful for us to draw our kids' attention as they discriminate between sounds. But they can make those sounds. They might just need some paying attention to what's going on in that different sounds. For example, the and the you notice one has my lips together, like in mitt, but, or mutt, which is a dog, but nut, something you eat. Notice my mouth is doing something very different, the than it is with the So as your kids are making these connections to spelling, that awareness of those different sounds is really crucial. So I'm going to pause my talking and see if there's someone who would like to help remind us all some of the things that stood out to you last time, what we did, or maybe an aha or a question from either when we talked about science of reading, that big picture of reading in the first time, or the phonology and phonemic awareness last time. So I'll give you a moment to see if anyone raises their electronic hand or just unmutes. Amber, good question. Is this something I would still do with middle schoolers? If they're struggling with the sounds, yes. So especially pronouncing things. I was working with a 6th grader today who was struggling to sound out words. Now, granted, she was a 6th grader with an IEP, but she was included, and she was trying to sound out words. And it's funny because I saw her trying to remember, I think one of the words was Paleolithic. And she would struggle with the lith part. And she kept wanting to make it a s or a ch, I can't remember, or a k. And I was like, no, you need to look at it. See that it's an L. Oh, I know it's an L, but then she tried to remember. I said, but you need to make that connection. And so not only the connection between the sound and the symbol, but I even with my daughter, if she's struggling with the and the I'll say, look at my mouth. I want to help you know which one it is. Well, actually, this girl today too, there was a sound, I can't remember what it was, where she was making the instead of. So I said, look at my mouth. You need to see what it's doing. No worries, Deb. Trish, you see, we talked about the English phonemes. Yes. We were practicing and identifying sounds.
It was the identification that was very interesting because as we practiced them, I know our group were like, okay, well, this is how many we had it. I mean, we were like, this is it. And then we got in our large group and it was like, oh, it wasn't that.
It takes a while. It takes practice, and that's okay. I've had someone in one of these classes who'd heard the same thing from me for like 6 times, and finally she said, "Oh, now I get it. This is the 6th time I've heard you say that, but now sometimes you have to be primed for it." So it comes with practice, doesn't it? Would anyone else like to share, or question, or bring something up before we move on?
I'll share something that Amber's comment actually reminded me of, was that I remember the slide where there were the 2 pyramids inverted, where it was showing that like the kids build off of their oral language and then like their phonological skills and on up to the comprehension, and how that one. And so when we're looking at what skills, what interventions they might need, we can kind of start from the top and work our way down to find where it is they're struggling.
Is that a little one we hear from you, Robin?
Yeah, I have. Okay with me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And for those of you who weren't here for this, let me grab the link to this as well, and put it into the chat box. Thank you for that. I really appreciate Margie Gillis's flow chart, and that's why I made this. I felt like it was a really a way to look at what do we need to drill down for our older students who are struggling, and then how do we build up for the younger ones. All right, let me jump into where we are today. We were on phonology, now we're on sound symbol correspondences. There's going to be a lot of fun here. So for those of you who are new, I'll just give you a little bit of my background because I know we're here to jump into the content instead, but just so that you know who I am, where I am, what brings me to this work. And I'll invite you, like I said, when we get into breakout rooms, you'll have an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit more. But I also invite you to put something into the chat. Oh, Jamboard. Let me grab that to make sure that everybody has the Jamboard. Now, where you can add on where you're from. Like I said, I'm on one computer today, so give me just a second. And if you notice that the number of participants has changed and I need to put the attendance, thank you, someone just said, can you put the attendance link in again? Okay, so as I'm doing that, just giving you a little bit of background that brings me to this work. I initially was trained to be a secondary high school English teacher, but I didn't do that. I did teach English in a French-speaking country in Morocco with the Peace Corps. But then I got a job at a school for kids with dyslexia, and that got me into special education. So because some of our kids were district funded. So I taught kids with dyslexia, and then I went on to teach, that was in elementary. I went on to teach middle and then high school special education. And in that meantime, I got my doctorate in learning and teaching with a concentration in special education. And I went on to teach people to become special ed teachers, as well as some special ed content for gen ed teachers. And now I work at the ESD, and I absolutely love what I do. I feel so very lucky that I get to work with all these fantastic teachers and get to know more people. Thank you, Elizabeth. If you just put in, you said you District 414, is that Bethel?
That's in Deer Park, so over by Spokane.
Park. Okay, I'll add it in for you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you can't put something into the Jamboard, put it into the chat, and I'll add it in so we can see our community into the Jamboard. I mean, just write it down now for you now. Deer Park. That's over on the east side, right by Spokane Mead.
Oh, yes, it is.
All right, I'm getting better. Okay. So one of the things that I asked in previous time, the first session, was whether or not people had done a simulation of what it's like to struggle to read. And I think a lot of people had said no, they hadn't. And I'm looking through our past. Oh, I'm wondering if we skipped it, if we did it. It's hard to tell. So is there somebody who does in the first? I think there are enough people who weren't in there that first time that I will do it again anyway, because I think this is a really important illustration of the fact that reading struggles are not in the eyes, they're in the brain. So if you have seen the movie Fat City by Rick Lavoie, please don't give this away. But the first thing I want to do is I'm going to show you an image. It's a really, really bad image. And it's hard to see if you've never seen it before. I'll clear those off. And I want to make sure that everyone can see this. If you can't see it, please let me know and I'll see about making adjustments. But then the next question is there anyone here in this virtual space who has never seen this before who can tell us what it's a picture of?
I don't think I've seen this before. I'm not sure.
Can you tell us what it's a picture of, Cherry?
I can't, I'm not sure. It looks like an old stamp.
Well, then I can tell you've never seen it before. Because those of us who have seen this, you can't unsee it once I create meaning for it. And that's what we do when we teach kids to read. Is there anyone in this room who's never seen this before who can tell us what it's a picture of? You're confident because you see it and you said, of course I can tell you what that is.
Is there a cat in the corner?
No idea.
There was not a cat, Kathy.
Oh, come on. If you turn your head sideways like that, there looks like a cat.
Is there a farmer feeding a cow?
What was that?
Is there a farmer feeding a cow?
So I'd be very curious, Tanine, where you see the farmer, but it is a picture of a cow. It's actually just the cow. So let me show you another picture. Darius, you see it, don't you?
Well, when you said that, because at first I thought maybe it was a squash. Yeah.
Do you see the cow now? Okay, let's try back to everyone. Do you still see the cow?
yeah.
So I'll do that again. Here it is with
I
the
see the cow.
outline. Here it is without. Now, this is what we're doing when we're teaching reading.
I see the cow.
We're providing meaning to what you see. Now, I didn't change this image. Now, and then here I'll outline it again in case there's anybody who doesn't see it. Here's the ear, the nostrils, the nose. Here's the other ear, the top of the head, and 2 eyes here, the angle, the nose. I can't see anything but this cow. So, Deneen, I'd be curious where you see this man feeding the cow. I just see that cow's head. And because that's what the meaning I have for it. Deneen, do you still see the man, or just you just see the cow?
Now I see the cow, but I thought like on the left-hand side was the man, and then that was like his hand down at the bottom with that little white, looks like a thumb sticking up, was his hand, and then the cow looked like kind of horns on the top on the right. Clearly I was wrong.
Well, and again, this is about perception. This is how we are perceiving things, because I didn't change this picture between when you couldn't see it and now when you can see it, but I created meaning for it for you. And that's what we do when we teach reading, is we teach kids what these symbols represent, and we create meaning that by itself, none of these really have any meaning. It's when we stick them together that it represents something that has meaning. And that's really the hook for us, is when we have meaning to it. And that's what we're doing as we're teaching to read. I have another version of this where it talks about visual perception. And it's a great illustration of, we teach kids that S represents, but in the word visual, it's a Z, visual. And then you think, so many times I teach sound symbol correspondence. When I get to the Z sound, remember last week when we talked about the sounds, and people are like, what do you mean? What do you mean Z? Well, like visual, measure, treasure, genre. If you think of any more, feel free to put them into the chat box, because that Z sound is something we use in our language. All right. So these are the scores from this class. And if you weren't here before today to do the survey, I'll grab it for us during one of our breakouts. But the 34 of the current 47 of you have done this survey. And I like to always show these, because I think it's important for us to see this group and the heterogeneous nature. Notice how we've got some middles in the 4s and the 8s and a lot of those, but we have somebody all the way across the board. So just to keep in mind that when we're doing exercises and when we are sharing in our breakouts, that we have some people who are likely stronger than us in our knowledge, and there are like people who are not as far along in their knowledge journey, and we all have something to learn from each other as we grow. All right, so we're going to start with a reminder of those phonological pieces from last time, because we're going to now connect it to the reading piece. So I'm going to share differently so that I can share with us how to get to these handouts for those of you who don't have these yet. So give me just a moment as I'm going to actually pause share. Let's see if I can do this quickly and easily. All right, I'm going to no, whoop, sorry. We're going to go to a basic share and the whole thing. Okay, so you're all able to see the resource guide, right? This is what I put into the chat box earlier. Thank you, Deb. You're one of the 2 people I can see. So we're going to go here to the handouts. We're going to follow this link, the tiny URL Dyslexia 101 handouts. And we wait for the circle to go around. Okay, we're going now to our Kilpatrick chart, because this is David Kilpatrick's illustration of, on the left-hand side are the phonological development piece, and the right-hand side are the reading piece, the reading development for individual word reading. So this is where we're focusing. This is your handout to take with you. Okay. So I'm going to pause, share, come back to this, see if I can, how tricky I'm going to be on this. Oh, no, wrong one. New share. Give me a second. Okay, we're back. Cool. That worked. Okay. So these were the elements you saw on the left-hand side of that chart, the levels of phonological awareness. I color-coded this one. It might be different from what we saw last week, to illustrate the difference between your early skills, your basic skills, and your proficient skills. Keep in mind, I might not have said this clearly last week, but I do want to emphasize it, especially for the people who weren't here last week. this is not a progression that depends on the others. So in other words, you don't have to master your early skills before starting your basic and before becoming proficient. This is the progression through which we normally learn these skills. I don't think I'm sharing there we go. Sorry, I forgot to unpause that. So the early, basic, and proficient. Notice the ages here on the left. This is your typical expected. I've worked with high schoolers who still struggle to manipulate sounds and to change clash to crash or spill to pill. So this is your typical progression. But as I said, you get the biggest bang for your buck, even with your kindergartners. You want to start your instruction at your basic level, blending and segmenting. You want to get to our sounds and our letters immediately right away, because that's your biggest bang for your buck. Okay. This is the right-hand side. This is that phonological processing. It influences our letter sound knowledge. So what my ability to understand sounds helps me be able to figure out and connect them to letters. Once I'm able to blend and segment, I'm able to do phonic decoding, which is converting those letters to sounds and blending them to read words. And then the next step is the orthographic mapping. This is where I'm attaching those sounds to the letters themselves by segmenting the blended words and then looking at what I did. Before I illustrate what I mean by that, I'm going to put a poll in for us on whether or not people have heard of orthographic mapping. So let me launch this poll for us and give you a moment to either click one of those choices that fits your understanding. If you can't access the poll for some reason, I'll just read these to you and you can put it into the chat. The first choice is I've never heard of it. Second, I've heard of it, but I'm not sure what it means. Third, I have a vague idea of the concept. Don't ask me to explain it. And fourth, I'm comfortable with the term, but I can always learn more. And people are going pretty quickly on that. You all are awesome. We have 84% participation, so I'll go ahead and end that and show you the multiple share results. So you can see a lot of variety, but the majority having heard of it. So, but you're not alone, even if you're in the I haven't heard of it or you're comfortable. I'd like to share that where we can see the heterogeneous nature. So orthographic mapping, it's really in essence, number one, going through the best way to do orthographic mapping explicitly is through spelling. Get your kids to spell something. When my daughter was struggling to read things earlier on, I'd say to my husband, who was a stay-at-home parent, if she's struggling to read it, have her write it. Because that's where she's going to do the orthographic mapping, is through paying attention to the sounds. What are the sounds in that word? And then how are they represented in print? Now, for many of us for whom English and learning to read and write comes really easily, this is an implicit process that goes on in our brains without our knowledge. It just happens without us thinking about it. For our kids for whom they're struggling, this is a process we might need to support them with. So what is that process? This is what it looks like. So I'm apologizing that I don't have annotations because I'm on one screen. So I'm going to illustrate and explain what we're seeing here. Lorna, Elkonin boxes, move it, say it, yes. Those are all ways to draw attention to how are these sounds written. So what you're seeing here, notice how I have a horizontal bar. The top part is the phonologic decoding. The bottom part is representing the orthographic mapping. So with my phonic decoding, this is the eye is what the kid sees. The mouth is what the kid says. And I had someone say, well, I also want to do what they hear. It's like, yes, but in this case, I want them to pay attention to the phonemes, which is really, let's pay attention to what your mouth is doing. So in this top part, they see this, and then they're going to sound it out if they need to, it, and they blend those sounds together to make sit. And they're going to go through that same process, even if it's a little bit tricky. There's more than one way of spelling that sound. In this case, I have the I consonant E representing I, or I have IGH representing I. And they both represent sight, but with different spellings. For reading, this isn't so hard, right? Now, when I spell these, I'm going to have to use my knowledge of which one it is. This one's a place, and this one's something I see. So this one, like the website, or I go to the construction site versus it was a beautiful site. So that's comes into play when I'm spelling. But how does my orthographic mapping happen? So this was the reading piece, that top part. I'll bring this back. This was the phonic decoding. I've read the word. Now, again, it might be implicit in my head, or it might be explicit if I need that support. I'm going to break apart the sounds of that word. What were the 3 sounds in the word you read? You read the word sit. What were those sounds? S, it. Now, how was each sound represented in print? The S was represented by an S, or you could say how was it spelled, which would be more kid-friendly. The I was represented by the I, and the T was represented by a T. We're going to go through the same process, even if the word is not as clear. Sound symbol correspondence. I would call this a yellow word if you have to slow down and think, because there's more than one way of spelling that sound. So again, those S and T are spelled the same way, but in this case, it's an I consonant E. In this case, it's an IGH. So this is an important process for us, because if you remember last time when we had the kids of actually it was first time, and we had the image of the kids and they were going through their process of learning to read from the early alphabetic to the later alphabetic to the consolidated alphabetic. This is how we jump from having to decode that word every single time, going through the decoding every single time, to looking at it and recognizing it automatically, what seems to be on site, or building the automaticity. The orthographic mapping builds that automaticity. You're connecting, or what they're calling mapping, the sound and the symbol, and you're making that connection. So this is what I mean by they influence each other. So if you were to print that out, one of the things I would invite you to do is to make these arrows, and it is a little bit easier to follow when you're doing animation, but we'll go with together. I always start with the up and down arrows, because it seems logical, of course, that my ability to rhyme supports my ability to blend and segment phonemes, which supports my ability then to manipulate them, to either delete them or change them. The same thing that as I learn my letters and their what sounds they represent, that supports my ability to blend them together and make words. And that supports those abilities then to remember them through the process of the orthographic mapping. But notice then, these horizontal are pretty easy, but these also, once I start the learning process, it becomes much more complex, because learning letters and letter sounds helps support my ability to blend and segment sounds. And then as I start being able to read, I start noticing that I can change one of the words. I can change what's in the middle of them, like clash to crash, changes in the middle, or spill to pill, because I took off this at the beginning. So you can see that once you start in this learning process, it becomes a lot more messy, because these skills affect and support each other in very complex ways. Not an easy thing to break down for us as an outsider or observer. This is one of the reasons why teaching is one of those things that it's hard to model, because they can't see what's going on in our brain. They can't see that our eyes are attending to every single letter, but so rapidly that we don't even realize they're doing it. Okay, I see something coming into the chat. Any interventions or curriculum for orthography? Danielle, there's only one. It's an intervention I know of by Learning by Design, and that really attends to this orthographic mapping. And it's something that you could create your own flashcards to do as well. But it's an app where you choose, first off, which sound you want to work on. And let's say it's the long E sound, like in teach, or these, or P, or whatever it might be. So, or B, the what flies around. And then you look at words and that have that sound, and you have the kids pay attention to which letters made that sound or represent that sound. So in teach, it would be the EA, or in peach, and but in these, it would be the E consonant E. So you're helping kids pay attention to what letters represented those sounds. Okay, one more thing on this, as we talk about the role of orthographic mapping, And this one is so much more fun with animations too, but oh, well, you get the whole thing. And then we're going to put everyone into breakout rooms and you're going to talk and process about this stuff. So the piece that orthographic mapping really bridges, it helps us get to automatic word recognition. So when I show this with animation, one of the things I talk about is that we recognize, obviously you wouldn't be here if you didn't, that just reading to my kids is not going to help them read on their own. And that is unfortunately, I know that that's something that's unfortunately a myth when you have parents being told, oh, just read to them a lot more and they'll learn to read. I'm always curious, how? Because just seeing and hearing these words simultaneously does not lead to my independent ability to read them myself. It helps, but it doesn't get me there. So then we've thought that, okay, if I sound the word out myself, I'll be able to automatically recognize it myself. There are many, many, many kids, thank you for that nodding, Deb, who will have to sound that word out every time they see it, or again and again and again. Unless I bring in this process of paying attention to how those individual sounds were spelled, that's my orthographic mapping. That's what's going to lead to my ability to recognize these words automatically when I see them. It's a difference between identifying the words and recognizing them. Not the same thing. Okay, I'm going to pause and I'll adjust my lighting while you're in breakout rooms. We're going to give us some time to pause and reflect and think about this. And I want to start involving more and more choice. So I'm going to create breakout rooms. But if you prefer having quiet reflection, you can reflect on your own. I always think that there's an advantage to verbalizing, but I'm a very social person. So I'm going to pause the recording for this and create breakout rooms. And as teachable moments always come up in these conversations. So who would like to start? Anna, you look like you're concentrating. Complicated stuff, isn't it?
I'm happy to start.
Thanks, Carrie.
So when I was doing my master's in reading, I was really kind of hammered home the relationship that you're discussing between reading and spelling and decoding and orthographic mapping. And just today, I'm pulling a bunch of data from students that I worked with last year and looking at their beginning of the year scores and really noticing that the students who pushed back on orthographic mapping made much less progress. Like when I really start breaking down what I'm seeing, they made much less progress in their reading and in their writing because they did not see this correlation, because you have to, like you said, it has to be together. The reading and the writing have to be in a symbiotic relationship that goes back and forth. So seeing it in data, crazy.
Well, Carrie, I'm really curious where you did your preparation, because so often I hear people say, I didn't get any of this in my program. So it sounds like programs are changing, or depending on where you got it. I'd love to hear where you got that strong emphasis.
Grand Canyon University but it's in reading. Like my master's is in reading, so it
that doesn't matter. There are people with their master's in reading who still are very whole language. So thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that, and I love that real connection in the data. I mean, I always talk about teach reading through writing, and you've illustrated it so much. Thank you with that. Cindy, I'll notice that and put you on the attendance. Thank you. How about somebody else who would like to share?
So we were talking about, kind of the encoding and decoding and how they have to go together to make that into a successful reader. And but aside from just encoding and decoding together, it's just really drawing their attention to those connections. And that is really important to make progress.
Thank you, Danina. I totally appreciate it. Again, that two sides of the same coin, reading and writing. How about one more? Hi, Mary. Mary, you're in a circle of grass. Did you want to share?
Sure. I think what we talked about was with orthographics. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. We're good.
So anyhow, I think what we talked about was that when the kids can actually put it down in writing and go like it, and then when they look at the different versions of like IGH and they see, oh, that's that sound, that's one sound, and then they see it, it makes those connections. So it's more hand-on, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but
no, you're right. We need to be making that connection between the IGH, both in isolation, like in sight, or when you put an E before it, now it's a different sound, like an 8 and sleigh and way.
right.
So that recognizing those letter patterns and the statistical regularity of those. I mean, it's all about statistics. I'm sorry for those of us who aren't strong with math. I'm one of those, but I did math well in high school, but in college, statistics works, but sometimes we all have our strengths and our struggles, right? But it's all about statistics. And that's really, I'm going to jump us to here because Mary and Carrie, what you were talking about, this is this imperfect relationship between speech and print is so crucial for us to be teaching our kids. I mean, this is to me become really my number one. I mean, this is why I created a slide with just this quote, because this is the most important thing we can teach our kids. Because when they look at that IGH, and they say, oh, like I remember my son when he was first grade or so, that IGH, why? And I said, well, honey, that's a really, really, really old word. Like the K and IGH, like the K and IGH. I said, we've changed how we've pronounced it after we decided how to spell it. We used to have it in our language. We don't anymore. It's hard. It's weird for us. It's too much work. And we used to have a in our language. We don't anymore. So it used to be knecht. And now it's night. And so we've changed how we pronounce it, but we didn't change how we spell it. Sorry. But having these two different spellings between N-I-G-H-T and K-N-I-G-H-T, we can see the differentiation in meaning. So that's really crucial as well, is that having these homonyms spelled differently reduces our cognitive load for us as we're reading. Because I don't have to look at all the context to figure out the meaning of that word. The spelling clues me in if it's which bear it is, which pear it is, which night it is. The spelling clues me in, so it's faster for my brain. Now, granted, I have to have that sound, spelling, meaning connection. Remember that triangle, meaning, sound, and spelling is so crucial. You have to have that connection in order to do that. But this is that piece. And when I say it's imperfect, I mean, come on, how many of you actually say you put butter on your toast? I'm not seeing any hands. You say you put butter on your toast, don't you? It's that we don't spell with the D's. We spell it with the T, even though we pronounce it with a D or a sound. Or if your kids come home, you say, hey, did you eat yet? Or do you have a good day at school? We don't spell that with a J. We spelled it, did you eat yet? Or did you, not you. My mother used to tease me in the 80s. Remember, little, I want you. She's like, you want chew? I'm like, no, I want you. But no, we don't write the way we speak. And that is really important for our kids to recognize. And yet there's a predictability here. And one of the earliest sounds for them to start recognizing this is that's nasty z when it's not at the beginning of a word. Folks, how do you spell z at the middle or the end of a word? Carrie, I see you doing it. It's the S, isn't it? Is, was, has. Again, that imperfect relationship between speech and print. Now it sounds like a Z, but it's represented by an S. I spell it like S, even though I hear Z. But I'm only going to write Z. Well, if it's at the beginning of the word with a Z, I'm going to write it with a Z, aren't I? Never going to be an S. But later on, like boys and is and knows and has, it's going to be very commonly an S. All right, so this is what we're talking about here is the alphabetic principle. The most important things in our kids' literacy journey. And I'm trying to keep adjusting this so that you can see the whole slide. And that's hence my little fiddling around here and then. So we'll try and fix that. So when we're talking about that alphabetic principle, we're connecting the letters and the sounds. And again, you see those words imperfect and predictable. It's for my kids to recognize that what they see on the screen represents the speech. And I can write down anything I say mostly. I mean, we don't, it's kind of hard to write, but I might be able to figure it out. So it isn't imperfect, but it's a predictable way. And we usually develop mostly when I'm learning, I'm going to learn my letter names and then my letter shapes and my letter sounds. We sing the ABCs, that's the letter names. And the letter shapes we start playing around with. Now, there are programs who do sounds before names, and that I've not seen any research on which one is better. I've known people say, oh, let's do sounds first. And I've known people say, like, we need to say the sound as we write it. But it is the name that is the consistent piece. I'm not sure if we have time to get into that, but if we do, we'll talk about that. And I have to look at my plans. But the names are the one thing that's consistent. The letters have multiple shapes. We have a capital, we have small, we might be able to do cursive and printing, etc. Shapes vary and sounds very often vary. There are very few letters that only represent one sound, but the name is consistent. That's not going to change. So if you have your kids who need to hang their hat on something, definitely include those letter names. Elizabeth, you even, oh, trees, exactly. Tell them, no, Z, it's going to be a Z at the beginning of the word, not at the end like that. So this is where we have to help them move away from their phonetic spelling, because they spell trees the way it sounds, but now you have to say, oh, you're right, it does sound like a Z sound. But if I'm going to make it more than one, I have to add an S. So going from tree to trees, that's where the S comes in. Okay, so backing up just a little bit, and those of you who know me and have been with me, you realize I zoom out and I zoom back in and going from big picture to small picture. So when we're talking about, and I actually mentioned these a little bit already when I talked about the homophones. So this is another thing I tend to do is I will talk about all these things and then, oh yeah, here's a slide that has some visual about it. So as we're understanding speech to understand print, notice speech is temporary unless you record it, but even then it goes away as soon as you've heard it. It's not as permanent as print, which of course you can throw away. But notice that there are ambiguities in both. We have homophones in speech and homographs, graph having to do with the written form in print. But you will find that there are way more homophones than homographs. And the homographs, when you look at those, is it wind or wind? Yep. Is it dove or dove? Read or read, sue or sower, live, live? You have to look at the context to know which one it is. With the others, I don't have to look at context. I can know just by looking at the spelling what the meaning is. I'm trying to get to my, annotate my little, here we go. I can know that this is something I have to be afraid of. This is an adjective describing what this one might be if he's not wearing any clothes. Just looking at the spelling clues that in, whereas the other one doesn't. All right, let me move this out of my way. Okay, because when I'm looking at printed words, what I'm seeing is so much more than just the sounds. This is what makes our language complex. It's complicated. It isn't crazy. It's complex. Because we have so much more than what we're seeing than just the sounds. There are some languages like Italian and Spanish that what you see represents the sounds. It's not the way in English. As you saw in the word trees is a perfect example. That S represents, but it really represents the plural. So in that case, we're talking about the suffix S adding on a morpheme. So we are seeing the sounds, yes, sometimes, like in the T and the R and the E. Well, that we need both of them to make that sound. But also we talked a little bit about IGH being a spelling pattern. EIGH is another spelling pattern. When you look at why we don't end a word in a V, we'll talk about that later. That's a spelling pattern. So these are historical conventions that we do that we need to focus on and pay attention to and help our kids recognize. For example, we don't start a word with a double letter, unless, like, for example, unless it's a name like Floyd. We might have that 2 L's in Floyd. I'm trying to think of another one with, llama, but that's Spanish. It's not an English word. So we have to look at the words that are in English and how we can recognize these statistical patterns. And then, of course, history and those connections to the related words can really help us understand spelling as well. Because sometimes these conflict. So, for example, look at these words. Notice in my, whoops, we need to move that around. In the first example, if I wrote the word no the way it sounds, I would completely lose its connection to knowledge. If I wrote the word two the way it sounds, I've got 3 twos and I have to figure out how to differentiate among them. I've got the TOO, which usually adds an extra emphasis. And this one, I can connect it to twin or 12 or 20. So when my daughter, she would recognize and remember from visual that there needed to be an O, a W in there, and she put it at the end. I said, oh, honey, remember that OW makes the O sound like in window or snow. Or it could be owl, like in cow, but it's not going to make oo. OW never represents oo. Sorry. So where can we put, you're right, there needs to be a W, but let's think of twin and 20 and twist. And I know we don't hear it in two. And actually, historically, we did. It used to be twa. I'm going that one, but now it's two. It's easier for us to say. Twa is weird. So we just don't say it that way anymore. And if we spelled this one the way it sounds, we completely lose that suffix ed and our recognition that this is in the past tense. So we need to not write things exactly the way they sound. I think that was Elizabeth, whoever put that in about the chat with the word trees was a great example. Trees is the same thing as jumped. Oh, if you put them all, we would have way more complications if we did it that way. So I can't put the next slide up because it will give away the answers to the question I have for you. So I'm going to have to just give it to you orally, and then we'll bring up the answers here. So I don't think I have a poll for it. This is one you need to put into the chat box. I will check the polls. But nope, this one is one you need to put in the chat. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about, no, because this isn't a multiple choice question. What do you think? So we're going to talk about regularity. What percentage of everyday English words, so not the weird ones, not the unusual, not things like llama, which is Spanish, but everyday English words would you say are irregularly spelled? Just take a moment, put a number in the chat box. What percentage do you think are irregularly spelled? I love seeing the variety. We have everything ranging from, I think our lowest is 2. I see a 3 and a 4, and I see 55, 60, 75, 80. This is hilarious. Irregularly spelled people. Really that high you're thinking are? Well, I will say that unlike a lot of programs, I don't see irregularity as a black and a white. I see it really as a spectrum. But let's take a look at what Louisa Moats has some statistics. I love this 60, 40, 13, 14. This is fascinating. So everyday English words. This is according to Louisa Moats and the research that she's done when she looks at other sources of whoops, that changed the vision. So let me try that again. Here we go. So notice, 50% of our words there are true one-to-one correspondence. So that would be like the sit. It's spelled with an S, I, clearly an I, and t. All right, sorry, not sight, sit, sight. You get the idea. Pretty close one-to-one. Another 34% you can get correctly spelled or have issues with only one little error here. Here that in this case, the word S, then the letter S in the word island. An additional 12% you could spell correctly if you knew its etymology, knew its background, knew some information about it. Like, for example, why we don't end a word in a V. We just do. There's a reason for it. And that's part of that additional knowledge that I need to know about orthography. And really, she says only 4% are truly odd. Those are what I call really rare patterns. And even those, I think we might be able to find an explanation somewhere. So I keep challenging people and challenging myself to keep digging when it comes to why is it spelled that way. Okay, thanks, Janine. I see your point. Okay, so the image that I have here on the right is simply because I saw a video once. I couldn't grab it for some reason. It was on Facebook. And this woman pretended to be English and Spanish, and she's talking about the crazy English spelling. And she's like, why is English spelled so crazily? And that's hence the chart you see there. She says, because we spell German words like German, French like French, Arabic like Arabic, Greek like Greek, and all these languages have come into our language. I mean, and yeah, it's true. And languages into our languages, what I meant to say. And then the Spanish says, well, what about the S in island? Are you ever going to pronounce that? She goes, nope. And you said, are you going to ever, but you're going to continue to spell it that way? And she says, yes. So why is it there? It's like the throw pillow spelling. It's that S in island. Just got to throw it in. There's a silly reason for it. It's a historical reason. I can show you how the resources to get if you're interested in more. But let's look a little bit research for a moment. And I will pause and ask another volunteer to take a break for me or give me a break. Would anyone like to read any of these quotes for us? Okay,
I can read it.
Thank you, Cherry.
Okay. Research says assimilating knowledge of how print and sound are related. Let me see if I can. Related enables the other components of reading. Becoming a good reader requires rapid, fluent, automatic decoding of isolated words. Letter sound knowledge is central to both phonic decoding and sight word learning.
Thank you, Cherry. I appreciate that. So we're going to get into that letter sound knowledge because that's that crucial piece, isn't it? However, I want us to think for a moment first on how do we do this? We need to make sure we're remembering those letters and those sounds. So, and remember earlier I said meaning is the hook. I'm going to pause this for another moment and ask you to put into the chat box a number that if I want number one of these lists, 1, 2, or 3, that if I said I want you to memorize these 3 lists, which one do you think you would most easily be able to reproduce and remember? I thought I fixed the font so they were all the same size. My apologies. I'll make a note to fix that while you're doing those slides. Must have been in another deck. All right, look at all those numbers coming in. Let's see. Someone said 2. Jill, what's your background? Jenny's saying 2 as well. Most everyone's saying 1.
I'm just thinking that there's vowels in the middle. That would help me memorize how to spell a word. All right, so.
Do you have meaning to those, Jill? Are you a special ed teacher?
No, I'm a para. So, and I grew up as I have dyslexia, so that is something that has helped me figure out how to associate. Yeah,
I can appreciate that. Do you have meaning for any of those ones in number 1 though? Do you know what FBI and
SBA yes, I do. I do have meaning. Yeah, FBI and NFL and IRS. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I may not know what exactly they stand for, but they have meaning to me. Like number 2 does as well, but number 3 they're just completely random. And did anybody put in number 3? I think sometimes I'll get someone say 3 because they'll say like basm or sti or rur, but I mean that rur is hard to pronounce, isn't it? So I think Jill's her strategy of being able to sound it out or putting meaning to it, those are things that will help us remember it. Because the key piece here that I wanted to really draw our attention to is that last line, is that while I need to be able to see things in order to read, or if I'm reading Braille, feel it, it has that input. The storage of it has to do with the phonological and the sound symbol connections. It's really an orthographic and phonologic storage. It has to do with the sounds more than the visual. Because this is, remember this, I mentioned this earlier, that connection between sound, symbol, and meaning. So crucial. This is one we visited on our first day together. I just want to bring it back as a reminder that the stronger we have all 3 of these, the meaning, the sounds, and the symbol, the stronger connection we'll have in our brain for remembering those words. Okay, let's get into those sound symbol correspondences because this is really the meat of what we're talking about today. And we've talked about a lot of things that we need to get here. So as I've mentioned a little bit, the yellow, and I mentioned the word really rare patterns. I used to actually put this stoplight on my wall when I was teaching at Chartwell. And we called them green flag words, yellow flag words, red flag words. For me, if going forward, would I call it a flag? Especially the word red flag feels, but I do call them really rare patterns. I do call them yellow words or green words or maybe even red words, where the green ones, I can just look at it and go. The yellow ones, I have to slow down and think. And red, I have to do a lot more work here because this is really, really rare. Or maybe I recognize that this has a lower statistical regularity, that UGH is not as transparent, that it could be the f, like in laugh or enough or cough. It could be silent like in dough, but notice how it's making that a long O instead of a short O. So there are, the UGH is a very rare, we might see it like in though or bow, or it has a lot of different things, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's not occurring all that often. Hence, that's the rare pattern piece. Okay. Oh, I wish I had animations. We could be more engaging with this, but I don't because I have one screen. So I'm just going to put all this up and we'll have a conversation about it rather than making you guess and think about which of the different sounds that you can only be spelled one way, those are on the bottom, and which are the letters that only represent one sound. So I'm going to take a moment and let you think about those. And I will tell you that that list, letters that have consistent one-to-one correspondences, it's shortened for me many, many times. And I attended a webinar once by someone who had a lot more letters here than I do. And I'm happy to talk about why those are there. In fact, actually, I think I'm going to put the Q back up because the Q itself only represents the K sound. The QU together could represent ku, like queen, or k, like an antique. But notice both times the Q itself represents K. There's an asterisk on the F because there's one word where the F does not represent F. Who knows which word I'm talking about? Only one in our language. This tricked me once. I did an activity where I said, count the F's in this card. And I missed it because it doesn't sound like an F. And it's such a short little word. It doesn't sound F. It represents a V sound. You got it, Kathy, huh? That's why I have an asterisk, is because there's really only that word of. I love it. Of course. Exactly. Because of is actually the unstressed version of off. So off, it has its stress. I spell it with two F's. Of, I spell it with one F. It took a long time for us to settle on that distinction. For a while, they were spelled the same way. But all these others that you see in that list will only represent one sound. A lot of people will say, well, what about K? Well, actually, the K is there. Sorry, it was not about the T. Well, if it's by itself, it will represent T. But remember when we talked about butter, or if we put T with a CH, it becomes ch, or if it becomes with an H, it becomes th. So you get the idea of why I took that out, because it's when it's with something else, it may represent a different sound. I think I used to have it there. Or the T could make sh if it's followed by an I or a U or a D, or I or a U. So yeah, kind of complex. Okay. And then the ones on the bottom are the sounds that are only represented by one letter or combination of letters. So for example, the th or l are both represented by TH, nothing else. The ah, like an olives, is pretty much represented by the O, except sometimes it's represented by an A, like in what or was, the sound. Well, what, what, it depends on your dialect. And then the b, l, and v are pretty much always by the B, L, P, or V. Again, the V sound can be the F, like an of. So teaching tips, we need to make sure our kids are moving their mouths, recognizing those, the way that we're pronouncing them. We're also having them write them. Remember I said teaching reading through writing? It said those movements involved in writing, they leave a motor memory in that sensoromotor part of the brain. It helps us recognize the letters. I'll never forget when I was doing one of my first Slingerland trainings. In fact, I think it was the first one. There was a kid up at the pocket chart. And he's trying to remember what letter makes a certain sound. He's looking at all the letters and he's got the sound in his mind. Let's say it's, he's looking at all the letters and he's going, f, f. Can't remember which one of those letters made that f sound. Teacher said, put your arm up, you'll know. And he went, F fish, f. Because we retrieve how we store. And he had been storing that F fish f in his brain, that when he put his arm up, that light bulb went off and he got it. So that's that movement involved in the writing has left a motor memory for him. And he was able to remember that F made f. Okay. I think in interest of time, let's get to the yellow ones. We can always come back for some more teaching tips on this if we have time later. It's a little bit more clunky on one screen. My apologies. Okay. The yellow words is when there is more than one way to spell these sounds. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we've talked a little bit about the homonyms from the historical changes. I know that this is moving for us. Let me see if I can delete this for a moment. Here we go. So you can see that the sound placement dictates choices, and so does knowing the word origin. What I had here is, I don't know if you've heard from George Bernard Shaw, who says that English is crazy because you can spell fish G-H-O-T-I. And you see his rationale is G-H in enough, O like in women, and T-I like in nation. I added the circle with the slash because no, GH is not pronounced if it's at the beginning. Think of the word ghost or ghoul. GH at the beginning represents g, doesn't it? The O in the middle of a single syllable word will be aw, like in olives or octopus or hot. And then the TI would not make sh unless it's followed by a suffix on or an or al, something like it. It's not by itself like that. In that case, it'd be goatee, not or gaudy, goatee or gaudy, depending on how you pronounce it. So, in other words, sorry, Bernard Shaw, you're wrong on that. Okay, some other interesting pieces. I'm going to take away these for a moment. Oh, I might have to do this one. Let's see if I can delete and delete and delete. There we go. Some other influences of sound and spelling. So etymology, well, actually, that reminds me of etymology. On the last one, I have a resource for you I'll take us to in a moment. On our ADA compliant handouts, there's a whole list of etymological resources. But think for a moment, in charade, we normally teach kids that CH represents ch, right? Like in chair. Where's the language of origin in charade? Anyone think you know?
Greek.
The CH in, you know what, that's a really great connection, Shannon. Because I love you're thinking, because I'm thinking like chorus, the CH making in chorus is Greek. But feel the charade. Let me give you another name, like shishi, chaparral.
French.
You got it. So charade, a charade is the origin of that name. And even chair was originally French. It was chaise, but it's come into our language so long ago that we've assimilated it, and now we pronounce it ch instead of sh. But like in machine is a much more recent French import. And so we still have the sh sound instead of ch on that. And somebody added on for spaghetti. There we go. We've got France for France and French. Spaghetti, obviously Italian. Mosquito. I think I've said Spanish, but I think somebody corrected me by going to Edem Online. I'd have to look and see if I got that fixed on that one. Then, of course, we've talked about the GH, TI, and O. Notice on the meaning and morphological structure, if we spelled played like it sounds, A consonant E, we lose the meaning of the ED there. And then the SF, we don't have an SF in our language. We just don't. Sphere, that's, Shannon, a Greek word. And the PH making the F sound. And that's actually, if it's after a, we don't have an SF, we have a S is PH and not an F. So these are, again, what comes before or after it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with some of these conventions, and some of these are complex. There is a handout that follows and looks pretty much like this. I'll go back to our ADA compliant handouts, but I'm going to put you into breakout rooms to have this conversation about them. And then we'll talk about the whole group. And I think too, and I'm going to go to our Jamboard and see if there's a resource for you to explore as well. But in the meantime, I'm just going to start our breakout rooms for you to talk about how do you teach digraphs and trigraphs. Notice the ones I have in blue. There are some tricks and tips that you can help with. When do you use them? Why do you use them? Which ones can be used at the beginning or the middle or the end of the word? I have a little bit about soft C and soft G there, but there's sometimes exceptions on why would those, why doesn't the word girl follow this? Think about why there's an E in those words, curse and moose and mouse and have. Are some of these concepts that you see here, the words don't end in a V, J, I, or single U. Notice we have an asterisk for an exception on the I. Letters we don't double when we add suffixes to. Think about those silent letters and the floss rule. I'm just going to give you some time to process these with breakout rooms, and then we're going to talk about them as a whole group. Because it's been a while since you've talked to each other. And like I said, while you're in there, I'll check the Jamboard and see if there's an opportunity for you to engage there as well. And if I'm right, because I do have a great slide on statistical regularity, which of these terms don't fit, I'll add it into your reminders in the breakouts for you. Okay, stuff for you to talk about. And if you need to stand up and stretch, you can do that too. I'll make sure I'll add another minute or two to our breakout rooms. And if your room is all stuck and can't help each other, come back and we'll bring everyone back when we can. Or go into some of the other exercises on the Jamboard. So I'm going to resume recording and let's have a conversation about some of these. Oh, thank you, Kathy, for those word lists. I appreciate that. We'll have to add that to our lists as well. So how did we do? What are things we want to talk about? And I will also shift sharing and go to the Jamboard. But let's start here. The Jamboard might be easier, but we'll start here because I definitely want this conversation to start. Let's start with the digraphs and trigraphs and talk about which ones can only be at the beginning or only at the end. Which ones can be anywhere. And the ones in blue, I have some special hints to help your kids with. I'm wondering if you already know them. So let's open it up to the floor and your groups. Let's start with digraphs and trigraphs. Who talks about those and who wants to share?
Well, we totally did not talk about beginning endings if they can come, but we talked about the like the TCH and the DGE were with short vowels, and we thought the CK was also, but we didn't talk about WR.
So you were totally right, Kathy, that in fact I should color code these. That how about I do green for the beginnings? That let me do a little square here. These two only come at the beginning, and that's not green, that's blue. Let me try that again. Change my format to green. The WR and the WH only come at the beginnings. The ones you're referring to, CK, TCH, DGE, those only come at the end, but not only do they only come at the end, but they only come at the end of a word right after a short vowel. So, and I actually would have my kids incorporate that into their movements. So we would make C, K, Jack, K comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel. And notice this movement is because we underline our vowels. The vowels are the hardest part for kids to identify, especially those with dyslexia. It's the medial one. The vowels are just trickiest ones. So T, C, H, match, ch comes at the end of the word right after a short vowel, and the same thing with the DGE. So I was just going to say, Kathy, do you know, because you were unmuted, I'll take anyone. Who knows the trick for which words you use WR instead of R? Is it definitely at the beginning? But how do you know, excuse me, if it's an WR or an R at the beginning of a word?
I was just saying I always had to have my parapro help me pronounce the WH ones because mine just sounds like a regular old W. Most
of our dialects do. And so we just teach our kids, you know what, it could be a WH or a W, unless it's a word that's a question, then it will always be a WH. Question words like who, when, where, those WH words are question words. And the WH is going to be in the beginning. You're not going to have it later on. But does somebody know the WR? Why would you use that instead of R?
That one is linked to meaning because it has to do with words that are like involve twisting, like wrist and wrench and right and wrong.
Exactly. Robin's got it. Did you talk about that in your group, Robin?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we've got the digraphs and trigraphs. And for the most of these, you can teach them just like you might teach other sound symbol correspondences. Is let's use some keywords that help. Notice this would be the keywords that I used when I was teaching. And those blue bars around those are because those are the ones that come at the end of a word right after a short vowel. If I were to do this again differently now, I would probably put maybe a green around the WR and the WH because those only come at the beginning, just to help kids recognize that. Okay, let's go back to our orthographic conventions. Did anybody talk about why or in what conditions that CE and that soft C and soft G doesn't apply, like in girl or get or changeable? We're going to talk about that one in a couple weeks. Girl and get are two better examples, though. Notice we have the EI and Y, and a teaching tip for that. I actually had a teacher once say, you can sing it like your Old MacDonald song. There are 3 letters that soften C, EI, EIY. The same 3 letters soften G, EI, EIY with a S here and a J there. You get the idea. But what about girl and get? Why don't we pronounce those girl and jet? Anyone have an idea?
In girl, it would be the bossy R that takes control of it, but I don't know what I would say about get. Is that not right? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, actually has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
But you're right that the sound, but not the j sound.
You're right. You're right. Okay.
So Carrie, you want to know what clued me in on this one? And once I did research, I was like, oh yes, it totally makes sense now. Is I was listening to the radio and I heard them talking about, at that time, her name, we say Angela Merkel.
Mm-hmm.
But how do they pronounce that in German? Angela. And my light bulb went off and ding, ding, ding. Girl and get are Germanic words. Mm-hmm. So we're pronouncing it g before an E like they do in German. And so it's not Angela, it's Angela, like in girl and get. So that old Germanic words, where all the rest of these, you look up any soft C, soft G on Edom Online, it's French. That French influence made that sentence, engine. Those are French influence words. So it's where's that word coming from? That's the role of etymology. So instead of saying, sorry kids, English is crazy. I know we said soft G, and then you've got girl, and that just doesn't fit the rule. It's because it's German. It's a Germanic word. Girl and get and things. Okay, let's move on to that interesting E. Why is there an E? And I will give you a hint that these 3, the E is there for the same reason. And it's a different reason than it is there for this one. There are a few other rules or reasons for E. I won't want to call them rules because I don't want my kids worrying about too many rules. There are a few other reasons for a silent E, but let's look at these 2 of them. But there's always a reason for them. Before you go on, I'm just going to tell you, I've had kids who would put a little tiny squiggle, and I'd say, what's that? And they'd say, if it's supposed to be an E, it is, and if not, it's a decoration. No decorative E's. Who was that unmuting?
That was me. So there's no English word that ends in a V, so you have to add the E.
Yes, exactly. That's the in have, and like in live and live. Go on, Deneen. Do you know why there's that E in curse and moose and mouse?
Not exactly, except for, so it doesn't look like it's plural.
That's exactly.
Okay.
You are exactly right. And Doris is saying it would be curs, like boys. It would be more than one cur, more than one moo, or what a cow does, and more than one mow, or more than one house, more than one how and house. When my daughter was struggling with it, and I'd say, okay, remember, it looks like more than one how. When she stopped, she went sound by sound. H, okay, ow, O-U, S. But if you just stop there, it looks like more than one how. What letter can you add that's not going to add a sound? There's that E. Okay, so we've got the doubling and not doubling. Now, I should put an asterisk on the never double because in the word revving, I think that might have two V's, a really modern word. And that's another example, exception to words. So N and a V, the word rev, like in revolution, again, it's very modern. And I have the asterisk because of ski. And then, oh, X, like in taxiing. No, that's two I's in taxiing. But other than that, we don't double those ones as a general rule. Those silent letters, did you and your groups talk about when you might see a connected word or related word where that letter is pronounced? If you didn't talk about it, can you think of one now? You can put it into the chat or unmute.
Signal.
Yes. Signature. Uh-huh. Keep going, Shannon. Can you think of a word?
Bombastic. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Bombard. Uh-huh.
Hymnal and not autumnal.
Here you go. So these, when you extend it or show a related word, so you see those words that have same spellings are related in meaning, regardless of whether or not they're related in pronunciation. And then we have the buzz off Miss Pill or the floss rule, and that's stated down there. The FLS or Z endings are usually doubled at the end of single syllable words. There has to be a historical reasoning here, like when we have off and of. Why it stayed makes no sense. Maybe and someone earlier, if I have curse without the E, it would be curs. So maybe the MS with just one S is Ms, with two S's is Miss. But this actually leads very nicely to the exercise we'll see if anyone did in the Jamboard. I have to shift sharing for a moment. Well, I can go here, but then I'm going to have to move this around. And let me take off the annotations. So it looks like no one's done this, so let's do it together. Let me move this around so I can see the whole thing. Some of you are on the Jamboard. It's all about statistics. So let's take a look at these. There is at least one in each row that is not allowable. Let's have a conversation about that. And then we'll do a little bit about the red flag words, and then we're out of time. So you can either unmute or put in the chat box, or you can get on Jamboard and circle, or you can annotate. There's at least one word in each row. All right. Why, whoever did that circling, you're right.
Because CK follows a short vowel.
Exactly.
And EE is not a short vowel.
Okay, someone did the double Fs in flet. Why not? Deb, you're right, but why not?
Is it because you just double the F after a short vowel?
The double F's exactly at the end of a word, not after a short vowel. Definitely not at the beginning. Same thing with the Can you imagine trying to say get? We have the later, like in ring and thing. We don't have it at the beginning. All right, let's see if we've kept going. We have gotten all of them in the first row. All right, second word, Strouge. The DGE comes after a short vowel. Yes. There's exactly. Grok, the CK comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel. All right, let's go to the third row.
Bink.
What's wrong with it?
Bink.
Yes. Why?
Whatever it is.
Why not, Cherry? Why don't we? What's wrong with Bink?
Screech.
It's got two I's
Two I's next to each other.
next to each other.
I heard someone saying screech. Yes. Why? What's wrong with screech? Anybody know? That skr we do in our language, but it's an SCR. The SK comes from a Norwegian origin. And so it's like skirt and skull and skit. So those are of a Norwegian emphasis there. All right, and then we have the asteroid. We have the OY instead of an OI. All right, fantastic team. I'm going to reshare, go back to the other one. Isn't redrepment fun? I do too. Okay, let me clear all that off and go back to the slide deck and shift us a little bit so you don't have everything. You're welcome to everything, but I don't want to, busy things up. It's a little bit.
So in asteroid, why can you, I mean, I know it's an OI, but why could you not have an OY? Is there a reason?
So the Y and the I are two letters that are very interchangeable, and it's actually really the French influence. As I always say to my kids, and I say it lovingly, French is my second language, but when in doubt, blame the French when it comes to the strangeness of our language. So the Y and I are interchangeable, and we use the I in the middle or the beginning, the Y at the end. And when I say they're interchangeable, I even mean with the consonant sound name. If you think of the Y sound in the middle of million or billion or onion, you have that I making the Y sound. It's not as common because we don't do it at the beginning. The consonant sound at the beginning will be a Y, unless you have like a unicorn. Our language is complex, isn't it? But we don't have the Y in the beginning. And it's a French influence. I think it also might have had to do with our language was handwritten and it was clearer and easier to read. Okay. We're going to skip the sort, but I just want to illustrate that this sort is a fun way to help your kids when they don't trust you on some of those. Like when you say that the CH or the TCH comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel, you can prove it to them by showing them words where it matches and where it doesn't match. Just like the DGE comes at the end of a word right after the short vowel. So notice when they say, well, wait a minute, huh? Look at this. What comes before the vowels in all of these, or the ch sound? Here it's a short vowel in all of these before the ch sound. Here it's a consonant or a long vowel. And so you can see that pattern before the ch. If it's a short vowel, you use the TCH. And if it's a consonant or a long vowel, you use the CH. Great way to illustrate that. Okay. Lastly, we have the really rare patterns. I worked with a speech pathologist who said a kid came up to her once and she said, okay, I know that this represents I, G. So what's this I, G? So this, again, that imperfect relationship between speech and print. We have to help her realize there's some programs will say we're going to teach this as one whole, as the word 8, or you can also help her realize here we've got the sound A represented by EIGH, like in way and sleigh and neighbor. There are a few other words. It's not the most common A. In fact, it's probably one of the most rare ways of spelling a long A sound, but it is a way to spell long A. You have two sounds, A, T. The first one, and remember our orthographic mapping, what were those two sounds? A, T. How do I spell this first one? Well, depending on what word you're talking about, because A, T, there we go. There's one word, but that means the past of eat, isn't it? Okay, let's think of another way you could spell 8. I'm going to go EIGH because that is how you spell the number 8. So you have to connect in the meaning with the spelling for them to recognize. These are two different spellings of 8. One is the past of eat, and one is the number. So again, it's connecting spelling and meaning. Thank you, Deneen. Okay. So let me clear all that off and have this for me. I wish I had the animations. I might have to play around with this. I can play around with this to show it for you. Let's teach them in relationships as much as possible. It's our morphological knowledge that helps us judge when words are related in meaning, even when they're pronounced differently, like wild and wilderness. But let's look at this. People always say said is really crazy. I'm like, well, yes, but it's the past tense of say. Just like paid is the past tense of pay, and laid is the past tense of lay. So show those connections to kids, and they'll say, "But yeah, you don't pronounce it said." I'm like, "Well, they might have originally. It's just easier to say said than said." And look at that connection and meaning. And then when your kids say, "Well, what about AY? You didn't change the Y to I and stayed like you did in paid and laid and said or said." I was like, "Yep, you're right. You know, it's a lot easier to stick an ED on things. Maybe that's a newer word." let's look it up. Let's try, we can look these things. I want them to question and look at relationships and think about why things are spelled the way they are. The next group here, we have the will, would, shall, should. I'm going down the left-hand side before the right. I'll get my pen here. So with this group, notice the meaning and connections between will and would. I have that L in there, connects it in meaning to will. And the L in should connects it in meaning to shall. And then my kids will say, but what about that L in could? There's no L in can. You're right. My theory on this, and again, I could look into it, but we probably already had these two in our language when could came along. And it sounds a lot like would and should, right? Let's spell it the same way. Sometimes let's look for these analogies, and if it sounds the same, we're probably going to sell it similarly when we get a chance. Or I'll say, how else would you spell it? Could, that's a really weird one. Okay, and then when I look at this one, this is another word that people have a lot of problems with. It looks like does, more than one doe, right? But in this case, it's does. It's the past. I do, he does, and it is done, and it is something I'm doing. But let me pull this off and show that this is related to, let me just kind of delete it for a moment and come back. Go, and its relatives, goes, gone, going. So we've got does, done, doing, and go, gone, goes, gone, going. You can so show those relationships to help them see, even though it's not, again, connected in sounds, this is that imperfect relationship between speech and print. The other two pairs, you see the CH and teach, connecting it to the GH and taught, the TCH and catch, connecting it to the UGH and caught. So looking at those relationships as much as possible. Okay, we don't have time for one last reflection time, but I do have a couple of teaching tips that I'll share before our 6 o'clock. One, when it comes to those really weird words, let's remember that orthographic mapping, that interactive back and forth between the letters and sounds. Spelling, reading, two sides of the same coin. I'm going to go from my idea of the sound to the symbol, and I'm going to go from the symbol to the sound. This is segmenting the sounds of the words and connecting them to their symbols. And it goes with that same process, regardless of how transparent that connection is between the sound and the symbol. A few more tips before we are almost at 6 o'clock. Have lots and lots and lots of interactions. I saw very recently a meme or a thing from, I think it was Marianne Wolf, a quote from her saying that we need dozens, if not hundreds, of exposures. The reality is it's not exposures, it's engagements with these sound symbol correspondence. Because remember, just exposing me and just me seeing it is not necessarily going to connect it to the sound. So I have to read it, I have to write it, I have to interact with that. So hence I've changed the word to multiple interactions with the sounds and the symbols to really solidify it in my brain. Hence the multisensory. I'm going to write it, I'm going to say it, I'm going to see it. I'm going to use multiple senses to engage with that sound symbol connection. Let's start with a few. Let's start with those that are easier. Let's start with those that are more common and build to the more complex, the more difficult, the less common. So that we are building on what, starting with what is easier, building with the more concrete and going to the more abstract. Okay. I do invite you to write down for yourself a keyword or phrase to help solidify your learning today. An important idea, a reflection. There is a place in our Jamboard. I'm only going to show part of it now because in interest of time, if we go to, I think the next one here, this is a place for you to add in your own reflections. And I'll go back to here to remind us that we will not be together until Tuesday, October 17th because of 2 conferences between now and then. I will put in the chat the gym attendance link again for those of you who haven't signed in yet. And I also have our resources and my contact information. If you're new with us, please contact me anytime with additional questions or thoughts. And I will go grab the attendance link. And I don't want to keep you beyond our time, to respect your time, but I thank you for all of your engagement today. You've been a fantastic group. So I'm going to stop the recording.